holidays.
Welcome back to Consilience Conversations, episode 7. And with me in person, though you can't see him, is Dr. Matt Roos. Welcome, Dr. Matt Roos. Welcome to San Diego.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm right here, and you are within arm's reach. That's a positive or a negative. I'm not really sure. It's great to be here and in studio. Awesome.
I know it's interesting, too, because usually I get the feedback immediately from when I'm doing the recording from the fact that you can hear me, that this recording is actually working. So it's pretty interesting just to have you in actual person here, because I have no clue whether the recording is working. So hopefully it is.
Right. But from our standpoint, there are no blemishes. This is perfect, but it could be disastrous. We'll find out after the fact.
Yeah. And so, well, I guess so. Some things are the same, some things are different for this time. It's a special holiday episode. I think it's December 19th. My calendar is on the wrong month here at the home office, but time stands still over here.
Technical flaws.
Yeah, exactly. Well, old habits die hard, and I guess we'll be talking about that pretty soon, because for those of you who are on YouTube who can see the screen, a few of the topics we want to talk about today do involve the season. 'Tis the season, and 'tis the season to talk about the season. Many holiday celebrations are tied to religion. So what's the neuroscience of religion? And so we broke that down into spiritual experiences and the fact that humans have a strong tendency to anthropomorphize. And I wanted to talk about the Greek gods some with you, and maybe the Egyptian gods, maybe, the Christian god, and maybe the Norse gods.
We could create some new ones if we need.
Sure, right. And addiction and holiday feasts and treats. This is something I'm actually very interested in, because, something I'm always looking to do, and people can call this first world problem, but what I see in that statement is problem. So it's problem is how to keep the pounds off, and not just keep the pounds off, but keep from developing some nasty habits that follow me out of the holidays and back into my normal life. And, frankly, I want to feel good and not terrible from eating way too much all the time, and, only sugar. And then holiday gifts, giving and receiving. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about Aristotle and the great soul of man, but I'm very interested to see what you have to say about that. I can also give some Dante at the top of the Purgatorio. And I can even say, if we have time, what the origin of Santa Claus is and who he is based on historically.
Do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, so where should we start?
I think we should just start it from number 1, at least on the list there. And partially because that could be the one that's most contentious or even interesting to some people. And I don't think it's, I'll put it right out there to begin with, that we don't know that much about religious from the neuroscience standpoint. And I personally am not I'm not a highly religious person, but I don't have a negative opinion about religion generally. So, and I was actually born and raised Christian, and I sort of am more of agnostic these days, but I have no negative opinions about it. So this is just really more, what do we know and understand from the psychology and the neuroscience? And I think, so you already touched on it, the spiritual experiences versus religious beliefs. I just wanted to touch on that briefly, to say that it's hard to study religious beliefs from a neuroscience standpoint. It's just, how do you even do that? What experiments would you put forth to make that happen? And religious beliefs are, what I meant by that is even just like you do deep thinking. It's not just like emotion. It's religious beliefs from the standpoint of, well, I've thought about it a long time, and I've come to this conclusion, and the conclusion is not necessarily a provable conclusion, but it's brought me to this belief state. And that's very different from a spiritual experience where someone has felt as if they were touched by God, or God spoke to them, or they had some experience that ascended the physical world. So sometimes when they study these things, just finish up with one sentence, is that some and maybe the majority of the neuroscience experiments try to have subjects that have experienced what they would call a spiritual experience.
That's very interesting, because that sort of, just that distinction alone shows the interplay in, I think, a religion between sort of the practice of the religion and the stated or articulated beliefs of it. And even maybe a third aspect, the genuine religious experience, right? And that seems to be something very interesting. And this guy, Jordan Peterson, who I've often listened to, talks about this book, Soma, which is some guy investigates.
It's Soma, S-O-M-A.
Yes,
yeah.
S-O-M-A.
Which means body, which is also the soma is the part of the cell, the neuron that is the,
right.
I don't know, the main volume of the neuron is in this so-called soma.
Well, it's also supposedly some drink or some psychedelic drink that led to possibly the expansion of human consciousness at some point. This guy claims. But all that goes to say is that spiritual experiences, regardless of what induces them, do seem to be within the realm of what is possible for humans. And I think it's interesting to find out. It would be interesting neurologically to understand what is happening during one of those experiences. I don't know if what we would have to do is like find somebody with epilepsy and see, what is going right on during the, I forget what the moment is called before the seizure comes on. It's called something like the horizon. I know the onset. It's
kind of like I'm drawing a blank too, but it's kind of like the event horizon, which is just which is the terminology from black holes, where you cross that threshold and it's not, you can't come back from that. It's going to happen.
Yes. And in any case, what I'm also interested in is to what extent a religion is, and I want to ask this right because I was thinking about it from a neuroscience standpoint, is not just the articulated expressions about the belief of it, like my relationship to the religion is this or that, what somebody says, but the practices that somebody embodies in line with that religion and how that ties to general in-group sort of practices of acting in the same way as other people because they obey the same code or the same set of rules or the same set of embodied rules if you don't know them, right? Like when you're in a pack or a gang of friends, right?
Sure.
Why are you in that gang of friends? You don't know. You're just
you may not even, for at least some individuals, they haven't given it critical thought, not to put them down for that situation. You're born and raised, and you observe what others around you do, especially as a child, and you follow those same patterns of behavior. It's sort of the memes that are passed down, and religion is definitely, hugely, religion is a set of memes. I guess at some point not all, but many people mature, they grow older, they become, their thinking becomes more introspective and critical, and they will think about whether the actions that they're taking have real meaning or why they do what they do. But yeah, you're set in a direction based on what you've observed as a child. So how that's related to, and I guess that's somewhere in between these definitions of spiritual experience and religious beliefs, where sometimes it's not a single experience, it's just what you've been exposed to, and it's not even it's sort of a belief, but you didn't critically think about that and come up with that belief. You were just sort of went with the flow. And that's what happens to a lot of people.
Right. There's sort of an anthropological aspect to it, or sociological aspect to it too, that it's interesting to what extent one's thoughts or beliefs are then given embodied expression as actions, which are customary then. I suppose then your customary actions are reflections of customary thinking, which is not your own then. And so it's interesting to what extent a religion then, and I believe at least Dante thinks that this is sort of the idea of medieval Catholicism, that the point of it is not only to navigate through these difficult times in life. He himself was in exile from his home, but to develop the capacity to get through hard times by developing sort of one's logos, one's mind, and that was sort of the ultimate goal of a religion, to be maximally adapted to one situation, and one situation would always be social. And I think that's just to tie that to the next point.
Well, go on.
Just
for a second, because you said it a couple of times now, and I didn't pick it up the previous time. But and I don't know if you meant this particularly, but of course, many religions have ceremonies and traditions,
right.
and whether, and you can relate to these things to perhaps non-religious things like yoga style meditation or Buddhist meditation, which Buddhism is some elements are very religious, some are more like a way of life.
Sure, but we wouldn't call it a business.
Repetitive actions or habits, and sometimes those things are done, and they could even be physical in terms of like for health or potentially defense and fighting, but really oftentimes to, in a way, take your mind away from your everyday activities and put it into sort of a more relaxing state. I don't know if that's what you had that in mind at all when you were commenting on those things, but there are some elements of religion that seem to be, particularly this, again, the ceremonial type, where it has almost nothing to do, to me, with the religion itself and the beliefs thereof. It's almost more like senior psychiatrist, or it's a therapeutic process.
Well, and that may be part of why there is the rise in psychotherapy as there is a decline in the religion, because exactly, if humans, like we've been sort of putting out there, inhabit a mental space as much as they do just an actual space, then theaters of awareness have real value to us, in that they bring our awareness, our very limited awareness, to specific spaces and specific places of rich information and ideas. So what a religious space is, at least, is a place you go to in order to literally move in different ways while thinking about different things from your normal life. And the moral aspect, I think, is actually very small, or the moralizing aspect in that way. It's like, it's a place you go to escape the usual things in order to focus on things of higher value, or to give yourself a richer perspective on what's happening around you. And that itself has tremendous value, regardless of the other things that we might brand as bad about it. Mm-hmm. And that if we're going to criticize the specific manifestations, which is fine, we need to at least replace them with something better, because it's like that strikes me as having real value, and I think if we analyze sports, we analyze things like watching the game together, we're going to find out that actually neurologically, these are bonding ceremonies, that these are very helpful things to be doing. These are not lowly, mundane, not important things to do, that actually all these
are binding behavior, binding within, and you already mentioned in-group, and it pulls them together, which unfortunately part of religion, or at least in history, has been also out-group, which means outside your religion. And of course, we all know about holy wars and all sorts of challenges there, even certainly to the modern day. But I guess I'll just leave that at that, and we can comment more if you would like, but I'll just bring this back a little bit more to the neuroscience once again, and just say that, we don't know that much about it. I highlighted a couple things in some of the notes, but there are sort of correlations between extra activity in certain parts of the brain. You can't point to one. I believe you might know this better than I do, Alex. I think historically, maybe Aristotle or before, there were some thinkers that thought the pineal gland was sort of where the soul is.
Yeah, that's René Descartes.
Probably where religion or God somehow connected with humans. And part of that is because it's one of the only areas of the brain, and it's really a gland, that is not lateralized. That is, there are not two halves, one on the right-hand side, one on the left-hand side. It's just bam, right there in the center. So that was part of their reasoning, to my understanding, of why they thought that. But I think the more, to get away from the neuroscience and just not too far, but just, as I also say here, humans are very inclined to, we evolved to try and interpret other humans' reasons, understanding, like, I'm trying to read your mind. I'm not really trying to read it, but when we communicate, we're often predicting what the other person might be thinking, and that oils the conversation, if you will. But it can be a negative too, because we are tuned or evolved to anthropomorphize and to find causes where there may not be causes. And we're very good at finding causes that truly are the causes, but we're also sometimes bad at ascribing a cause to an effect, and that has, this can go back to our cognitive biases conversations, and it makes us amenable to anthropomorphizing things. And of course, God or gods are sort of anthropomorphizing, especially if we go back to
Zeus,
the
Thor,
ancients, and thinking about how every body in the sky is connected to a god. So again, I don't think this means, none of this is to say that there is no God, or there are no, something higher than humans. But I think that's a large reason why religion is what it is, and why so many people are religious.
Well, I'm going to try a big point here, and I'm going to try and connect developmental psychology, literature, and neuroscience all at once, because after all, that is what we do here.
It's a big step.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think. Sort of part of the developmental pathway for a human is to think that at first everything comes from heaven or from God, because Piaget says that first you have sort of the image of the mother, then there's the image of the mother and the father sort of differentiates, then there's the image of you as well. And then from that you sort of develop or don't. And the Freudians sort of believe this, the Jungians also believe this, and this recent guy, Jordan Peterson, believes this as well. And so that seems to be the story that you're housed within as you develop. And so given that it's the holiday season, the story here is, there's both a Christian story and sort of a less Christian sort of Santa story, like a Germanic story at play here. And I want to focus on that one just for a second, though I could speak to both very easily. Because actually Santa is rooted in Christian thought too. The guy, Saint Nick, was a bishop, supposedly. I think a bishop of Cusa. I could be wrong about that exactly, but the idea, or the story about him at least, is that there was this nobleman and he fell on hard times, and so he couldn't provide a dowry for his daughters, which meant he couldn't pay a young man, the money he would need to get settled and have a wife at first. And so no young man could court his 3 daughters, and so he was going to have to
Excuse me.
Yeah, the season. He was going to have to sell them into prostitution. And so the day before this was supposed to happen, they had these stockings, and Saint Nick, not yet Saint Nick, sneaks in and puts like a wedge of gold, a piece of gold, into one of this girl's stockings, and then does it 2 more times. And so that's the idea of like giving and being charitable during the season. But just a couple of things about this season. One, neurologically speaking, if people are embodying a certain action and they change a certain way of acting, and they change what that which they're perceiving and talking about, and even how they orient themselves during a certain amount of time, doesn't that mean they're embodying a certain spirit? And doesn't that make like the spirit of Christmas the realest thing possible? Just A. But the B, the bigger question I want to ask, and I know that was already like one you want to comment on, is to what extent do you think it is the case that as you develop, you think sort of the image of development in your head is one of Santa? The culture gives and just gives and gives, and sort of culture, society is the image of Zeus, or the all-giving father of Thor, or Santa, this old wise man who has all the gifts and the next things for you.
Would a modern day version of society be government, or is that too far afield?
I mean, that's definitely part of it. That's part of what is already there. But I'm not even sure exactly what I guess this relates to the third point, holidays, giving and receiving, and how giving makes us happier than receiving. That sort of, and this is going to be a weaker point than what I at first had in mind, but to what extent, as one is developing, there is a certain threshold which one goes through after what,
don't want to put words in your mouth, but as we can almost always observe with most children, they go through a phase as they age, and of course maybe even be more like a more adult development. But even as children, we are all initially selfish, and we care only about ourselves. And you may seem to love your parents, but mostly you're wanting the attention from your parents, and that's a selfish behavior in some regards. But as time goes on, not all people, but many people to various degrees become less selfish and maybe more, and I don't know if this touches what you're saying about society, and society being a giving father, or the Zeus figure, if I'm getting that correctly, that they see society as that, but also that they are a part of that society. And this is where I'm going on a little bit of a limb, and maybe that's, they see society as the, a benefactor, and if they are part of that giving society, that makes them feel good about themselves as well.
Yeah, and to what extent a human has to realize that we are the elves that produce the goods. I'm sort of
who's the Santa and who's the elf?
Right. Well, I think the Santa is the spirit of the society and of the giving and receiving, and it's as if as you become an adult, you become more the person who embodies Santa for this generation, for the youth. And I don't know, I've just been thinking a lot during the season about the relationship between adults and students, and I'm giving finals right now, and how we as adults sort of put incredible challenges and hurdles in front of the students, and that's actually the greatest thing that we give them, rather than just like actual simple gifts too, right?
Well, we give them hurdles and channels, but those that we believe that they can overcome and learn from.
And ideally ones that are more intricate and sophisticated and harder to get over than the ones we got over at the same age, because we're better as teachers and we have more sophisticated methods and tools. But I've just been thinking a lot about how the relationship of one generation to another is in general sort of like platonically speaking, and also like the Santa way of speaking, like one generation gives the challenges that will build the character of the next generation. And this just ties not only to the idea of like sort of Santa giving and you being the kid who receives and then you being the Santa who gives to the kids, but also recently I went through Harry Potter with some other teachers, and Harry sort of realizes in the third book that he thinks he sees his father and his father protects him, but he realizes that he has to protect himself, that's the greatest father. And I think that's also sort of both the Christian and the Santa Claus message, that if you develop your mental ability to adapt, your logos, your mind, your your consciousness, your fluid intellect, I don't know what we would call it in a neuroscience context, that is the best possible chance you have to survive.
You said something, I'm going to go a couple steps back that I thought was interesting, which was that it's a little bit kind of like, people always want, well, they don't all want this, but most would say that they want better for their children than they had for themselves. And I thought it was actually really interesting what you mentioned, if I interpreted it correctly, that maybe we put forth challenges for our children as a society, and those are challenges that we hope will help them grow as people and into the society.
Yes.
But are we getting better? Just as we build up our technologies, and we're obviously we have greater technology, or technology that can do amazing things compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. Are we improving as teachers in the sense that we are, and this is sort of a question for you, are we getting better at finding out ways to teach our children, not just to necessarily even make them, and maybe it's more like an acceleration. Are we honing that down such that we can get kids can develop and go further in life because we put them on a greater accelerated schedule, not even necessarily through pressure on them, stressful pressure, but just by posing the right challenges and giving them the right tools to overcome those challenges? Yeah,
frankly speaking, I think the answer is yes on all levels, and not just because of the efforts of teachers, but also because of the access to digital technologies like YouTube and their sort of universal access now, and I mean, just the fact that there's universal heat and sewage is taken care of with these kids, and most of them have good hygiene and have access to relatively good food, and so each generation their IQs are going up, and just like the technologies we have as teachers now, we now have, like, I'm going to a conference in January on this software, which I'm not getting paid to talk about, so I'm not going to say its name.
This software, you get paid.
So this, we're being corporate about this. So the software will help me track student writing progress over several years and help our district do that sort of thing. So the sort of metrics we have to manage and observe progress are incredible, and they're always getting more sophisticated. And we do have actual like measurables, like and these are things that we measure in standardized tests, for example, like math, quantitative reasoning, and like writing ability and vocabulary and ability to interpret, things like basic syllogisms and analogies, and we can quantify this sort of data. And we probably, if you grew up in the last 20 years or so, you took a standardized test almost every year of your life after fourth grade up through college. And then if you wanted to go on to further education, further standardized tests, right? The MCAT, the GMAT, the GRE, the LSAT, etc. And so our data collection and our teaching methods have gotten, and the, sort of conditions that students live within have gotten so good that we are objectively getting so much better, regardless of all the sort of bad PR you hear about. Well, because also our judgments and our
bad PR about teaching in general.
Just I think in general, systemic failure is the idea about education, but it's like, I think also our standards for education have become so high that they are unprecedentedly high, and they are
some might call it failure.
Right.
We're failing to meet higher bars than we've ever put up for ourselves.
That's right, and really extraordinary bars. And in fact, the bars are so high that we're running up against the limits of the structures of society and human genetics, right? Because there's a demand even for improving. I mean, we've gone pretty far from the holiday idea.
Well, I got an idea how to bring it back, but
right,
your statement.
Okay, but the methodology and the training out there for teachers, we're just seeing that the profession allows for the best, and the conditions at home in some ways, at least the material conditions at home. There are other psychological considerations if you have populations that have homes without two-parent families. There's just subjective data on the fact that harms the boys and girls, but boys more if there's not a male figure in their life across several domains. I think it's actually 70 domains, and I think Warren Farrell did that research. And
I don't even know what you mean by domains there, because
even shorter telomeres and shorter life expectancy.
Oh, okay.
Because
physical,
of that.
including a lot of physical measures.
Physical, social as well, and performance in school across multiple levels, ability to pair bond, things that you would just never even imagine, but maybe because you didn't have to imagine, or maybe because it's hard to imagine. Then you're a scientist. It's hard to imagine how much things affect other things.
Yeah.
Right.
Or sometimes it may be, as a scientist, it might be easy to imagine that, and some people don't consider how impactful that is.
Sure.
But let me, if I could, I'll try and bring it back just a little bit, which was, you launched in it, or we talked about giving versus receiving, and the benefits, or my connection is to you as a teacher and to many teachers. A lot of times you got into teaching. I can't speak for you personally, but probably because you liked teaching, but part of the reason you might have liked it is because you saw the benefit that it gave to your students, and sort of that made you feel good and happy that your students were doing well, which is related to our little one-liner here about holiday gifts. And sometimes it's better to give than receive, or you feel happier when you give versus when you receive. And there are studies on these, mostly behavioral or psychological studies, that people have maybe their immediate rewards about getting something for themselves, and we can put it in monetary terms, like you buy something and you get an immediate reward, but that's often short-lived. And a lot of the data suggests that when you give, you feel better and happier about it for a longer term.
Well, that makes sense.
There's some neuroscience data that backs it up, and maybe that's we can always, these are sort of retrospective or speculative, but maybe that makes sense from the standpoint of through evolution, we're a social society, and those groups that survive the best were the ones that worked together. And part of working together is sort of providing for each other, teaching each other, giving each other things, sharing things. And so, we're a broad society of humans, and they each display their different sort of personalities and preferences, but by and large, we're sort of programmed to be generous to others because genetically it actually benefited us to do that.
Well, that's really cool because that's a guaranteed way to make yourself feel better. And Peterson even mentions that disagreeable people like me who like to get rather than to give even report feeling better when they do give. So my little Grinch-like heart will feel better when I do that. But that also makes sense from a cost-benefit analysis point of view, and given the fact that we can see the future, and that's part of how we have social cognitive living space, right? Because we realize, unlike a sort of chimpanzee or rat just taking a dopamine hit, that in giving something away to another human that then makes them trust us, we've then invested in an enduring relationship where we will receive far more from them, including just peace with them,
sure,
which is
security and peace, and there sometimes there's reciprocity, although it takes sometimes time for that reciprocity to occur. And of course, as humans, though, this kind of goes back to the causal reasoning, where you might do something, and then eventually a person reciprocates, and it may be a year down the road, it may be 5 years down the road, but you put it together and you realize that, were they really motivated for themselves? In some sense, certainly many philosophers would say, you're always interested in yourself, right? That's what sort of happiness is. And if I make someone else happy, it's because it makes me feel happy. Okay, fine. That's charting it off into some philosophical territory. But it's
also smarter and better for everybody. So I see that as a superficial criticism, because it's like, we're so smart and sophisticated. So because
that may be wrong,
right? But I think it's just so reductionist that it makes it seem as if we're not actually far more sophisticated and smarter than that. Because actually, what we seem to have calculated without even knowing it is that when you're good to other people, they make you rich and they get rich too, and that's good for everyone.
Well, that's what I meant by that's why I was trying to connect it with like the long-term aspects of it.
Yeah.
And I thought about that initially because you mentioned apes or monkeys, and so of course they have social groups and they have reciprocity too, but the timelines are probably much shorter. And I'm speculating. I'm speaking without a lot of deep knowledge about it, but
that
humans can take a much broader viewpoint in time and also prospectively into the future.
Well, I mean, that seems to be why we created the pyramids and great cathedrals like Notre Dame and even great epics. I mean, the idea is not that this is going to be around for 5 minutes and disappear, any of these things. It's like, this is the key to I would say that is almost like the idea of like the kingdom of heaven, like the pursuit of humans of some shared goal that brings us together in an in-group fashion. And I do think that does produce difficulties with out-groups, but my next question would be, is that an argument against any in-group? But there was one last thing I wanted to say to connect to earlier, because I've been on this trip, and I know I keep making this transition in the middle of it, but I was going to say that I'm starting to see the change from anthropomorphized religions towards more articulated, or the word sort of religions, generally considered more abstract religions, like Christianity, philo and ontogenetically, in the same way that a human at first just is primed to see things anthropomorphically, but as they develop their rational intellect, they come to be able to see the principles underlying things. And they come to be able to see things more scientifically, away from just the experience of things.
Are you saying you're experiencing it, or you're observing this in terms of a current time, or a real-time transition in the way society thinks about religion? Or are you saying that you're now sort of looking back at the course of history and seeing that?
I'm saying three things. Yes, I'm seeing that and trying to orient us in history in that process. I'm seeing that in how a human just specifically ontogenetically as a human develops their mind. Like at first they see everything socially, and then they have to learn to see things more scientifically within those boundaries, and also that is what the history of religious thought is, at least as portrayed in ethics like Homer's in the Iliad and the Odyssey, where you have anthropomorphized gods, and going through Virgil, where they're a little more philosophical gods, and then Dante, where there's one god, and first he's sort of like a griffin and theriomorphized, that means made into an animal, but then he's three rings, and they're very abstract, and what do you have to say about that? And so sort of like the symbol that represents what gods are went from being very social to very abstract, representing sort of us going from very social ways of conveying information to more abstract.
Sure. It's like there's individuals over the course of history as themselves, as well as individuals. If you put your philosophers or forward thinkers on a time curve, and how they've evolved. And so sort of like I don't want to put them on a pedestal, but sort of upper echelon thinkers.
Pareto distribution, top notch.
But now society is going through that same process as a whole.
Yes, and that's interesting because like sort of the information, and this is like, you're a scientist and you have access to incredible tools, incredible databases and things. The people who are moving fastest in each generation are communicating with each other mostly, not with everybody else, which is part of what we're doing.
So there's like a lag. There's a little bit of a lag between the individuals that are pushing these boundaries and society as a whole. Right.
And especially over generations, where those people who are occupying those roles just continue to share with each other over and over and over and over and over again. And well, I don't know. That's very interesting to think about. But how did we get there?
We're kind of. I don't even know if we're spiraling anything. We might be spiraling outward, not inward.
Well, I know that what we were focusing on the one point about how humans naturally see things in an anthropomorphic way.
But you gave a nice counter example to that, and part of that is the evolution of individuals as well as society, as to not that this holiday season spectacular was supposed to be all about religion, but I like what you said. We used to think as a society mostly the gods were just these highly anthropomorphized characters, and now actually I wanted to this spurred a thought that I hadn't brought up yet, which was there's often many people in today's society that say I'm spiritual but not religious.
Right.
And it's sort of a term that I don't know what the meaning is of that. I sort of get it, but it seems like that's where it's gone to some degree, or at least for some people. And part of that may be they're afraid to commit to some concrete religious thoughts, and I understand that feeling because, like I said, I'm essentially agnostic these days. But it's a way of saying that you feel that. I think it's sort of a way to say that people are saying that they feel like they might be here for a reason. Their existence might be there for a reason, but that's about all that they really know. Sure.
And I would like the anthropologists to weigh in on this, because I wonder to what extent they'll say that's not possible, because there are certain sort of epiphenomenal feelings of like brotherhood and shared like communion or community feelings that you can't have if you're just spiritual, right? Like, how do you share that with? It's like hyper Protestantism, and that you have no community because your experience is so individual that it's impossible to share. It's almost like the religious version.
What is the church that you are in? Not necessarily physical church, or almost even more of an abstract church or figurative church.
It strikes me as the religious version, or sort of reductio ad absurdum of the idea of oh no, I'm forgetting the term for it. What is the idea that you have many different identities and that no specific term can house any of them?
I'm probably not going to know those.
Oh no,
I will probably hear it and know it when you say it.
No, it's a socio-political term. It's oh no, it's dropped out of my head. But basically, it means it's funny that it's dropped out of my head. In any case,
but is it sort of a discordant situation where you have multiple beliefs, or a cognitive dissonance condition?
Well, it is something we were talking about when we were talking about how, because of humans, how many different identities we have, we can't possibly,
like intersectional.
That's exactly the word. So intersectionality.
Yes.
It strikes me as the religious version of intersectionality.
Right.
Like I have so many different beliefs about things that I can't find any sort of common ground with anybody, but it is precisely that lack of common ground rather than just the set of beliefs that I would say makes sort of a religion more than just a set of beliefs, but something that has real sort of motive or acting force in one's existence. Like, I don't think that the act of going to church is nothing. That is an act. Like, you go to do something, you dress in a certain way, you see certain people, you interact with them a certain way, something is set above you. That's as real as things get, you know? Yeah. And you'll actually go to do it, and you'll pay money to do it. You'll pay their like $2 to the bin that's going around.
Well, you'll pay money, but you feel good about paying that money.
That's right.
It's actually, you were rewarded for that internally through your dopamine, through a cascade of multiple neurotransmitters.
Well, and, it's interesting too, because just to sort of get near the end of this now, to what extent, so when we think about sort of the engorging childish nature of Christmas that gets criticized so often, it's like it's just about receiving and stuffing your face, and that's showing how rich and spoiled and gluttonous and what a monster you are. And it's like, well, yeah, at one level of consciousness or one level of development in the Piagetian sense, but what we're talking about when we talk about the development of our culture's consciousness and of ours, and just how refined it is to have a spirit of giving for a month or so, and how cool that is. And people complain, why don't we have that all the time? It's like, it's cool that we have it at all.
And some people I think there are certain people in society that do have that sort of mentality across 12 months a year. They're not going out and buying new cars with big red bows around them for their friends or loved ones, but they just have a generous spirit.
Sure.
And so this could be, but there's, I think you're going somewhere with this, but I just want to say it's like there's certainly people that are it is about me and sort of gluttonous, but there's still a little gem of giving that's in Christmas or in the holidays.
Sure, no doubt. But I where I am going with it is that, like, to tie it back to the idea of Santa and developing from a sort of giving or receiving to a giving mentality, is that even neurologically, when you start to give more than receive, you start to feel better more often. And from a big 5-factor model idea, and also given the social psychological idea of reciprocity, you stabilize the situation around you when you are more generous. And supposedly in the primate literature, and maybe you can tell me about this at some point, it shows that primate leaders who are more generous rather than aggressive tend to do better with chimpanzees. And so it is actually better for you and your environment, which you are sort of symbiotic with, and your environment is your social environment as well, right? The people around you. So your life gets better, and you feel better, and you're safer as you develop towards that sort of
collectively.
Giving. Yeah.
As long as and I'll just be the one one small fly in this ointment, which I think we'd all recognize, is that's true if everybody's going to play by that playbook.
Sure.
And the problem is, the challenge is when you have a few individuals that are looking to take advantage of your generosity, and sometimes they just kind of are able to skate by in life, and that could be a lower primate or a higher primate. But I was thinking that what got me thinking about that was like chimpanzees, and some of the leaders I'm speculating will do well with that rule book, but humans are. And of course, chimpanzees are smart enough to try to con their brethren.
Oh, wow.
To some degree, but humans are going to be even better at.
We're much better
Conning their brethren.
I mean, some of our great heroes, Odysseus included from the Odyssey, is a great liar, and I can't wait to talk about that some.
Sounds exciting.
With you. Well, we've talked a little bit about religion and in groups, one of our favorite topics. We've talked a little bit about habits. We didn't get into holiday feasting as much, but I think we should say that for the new year. Let's talk about making resolutions and what a resolution is.
We'll see how we feel after the New Year's ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Based on our consumptions.
Yeah, we're going to plan on doing so many podcasts a month and see if we can just do that once or twice and then just give up, but still have a new membership to some software that we have to pay for the year, like the gym. Well, we've done this live and with Matt here in SD, and I hope you've
Hopefully
enjoyed
without
it.
any audio flubs, because we can't detect them right now.
Yeah, because we can't detect them. And well, we're gonna go out and have a nice holiday beverage now. This is well, another great meeting of the minds, and too bad we can't record later. But well,
Thanks, Alex.
thank you.